I'm going to go ahead and introduce the participants. You will know most of them already, but I'm going to give them a little bit of an introduction anyway. Ed Block is from Connecticut DOT. He's active in the areas of asset management, pavement management, and pavement preservation, and he is past chairman of the TRB Committee on Pavement Management Systems. Rhonda is a pavement management data analyst with Delaware DOT. Finally, Nate Moore has served as Assistant Division Chief for Pavement Management before assuming his new role as Division Chief for Geotechnical with Maryland DOT. The topic of this panel is to talk about performance measures, which and how states are dealing with the performance measures that have been promulgated. So, the first question, and everybody has had these questions for a little while. The idea was not for them to write answers. It's a discussion, not a speech. So, the first question: did your agency use performance measures prior to the FHWA rules on performance measures? And if so, what were they? What were your old performance measures? Ed, why don't we just start with you?
Yeah, Connecticut had performance measures for pavements as part of a agency-wide performance dashboard. And the measures we used were basically ride quality in the NHS and ride quality in the entire network. And that was selected because it was published by advocacy groups where Connecticut regularly was listed as having the worst riding roads in the nation. So in order to address that right away, we went with the IRI. And it's also one where the technology was repeatable enough to have numbers without spikes from year to year, unless the technology changed. So that's what we had for pavements.
Yes, we did. We don't use IRI. We have a whole host of other distresses that we collect and have for quite a few years based on the surface type. So the ones we had to add some new ones because of the thanks. We had to add some new ones with the new federal highway requirements, but we still have all the old ones. We have a whole data dictionary that we had created.
So in Maryland, we were collecting IRI since 1984 on a network level, and friction since 1984 on a network level. In 95, we got our first ARAN and started measuring rutting annually on a network level. And then we've gone through like 4 iterations of cracking measures. Our business plan was IRI based starting in 2002, 84% acceptable ride quality. And that got a little funny when we bought some new accelerometers and started sampling a little more frequently in 2006. Then our IRI got better, but not necessarily our roads. And but anyway, we had a 10th directional mile segmentation, and Pete Stefanos, who's now with Federal Highway Office of Infrastructure, sort of set our first IRI-based performance measures in place in 2002.
Okay, so we need to blame you.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Well,
it's always nice to know.
You're still blaming Pete. Did I say that on camera?
I'm just kidding you, actually. But it is interesting to know where that particular choice came from. How are you collecting your performance measures?
So we own and operate 2 ARAN vehicles. I'll start with our cracking measure. So we have 3D imagery, and we're using the algorithms pretty much right out of the box from Pavmetrics to do cracking detection. And we have 2 skid trucks as well, and so we're using a locked wheel rib tire test at 40 miles an hour. We're actually shortening the standard test with friction because our newer high-performance brake system allows us to get the information we need with less water, so we're able to have more frequent skid tests now. With rutting, that's all from the transverse profile extracted from the 3D imagery out of the A-Rain vehicles as well. So it's automated, but we actually have a video room with 4 people post-processing that data. So it's a serious operation to collect and manage all of that data.
Okay.
It is, we're small, so we contracted out. We have a consultant, and then, which this time again is AECOM with Manley collecting the data. They have the vehicle, the LCMS is what they're using just for cracking and everything else. I guess in the early 2000s, well, we first went on contract with data collection, and it was windshield survey. With the computer, they had a little screen they could pick, and we did that for 8 or 9 years before we went to semi-automated. And we had problems when we started all this because with the windshield, that's kind of what we all grew up with, knowing, okay, this is a 70, this is an 80. When we first got the first set of ratings back that was semi-automated, they were way off. And we had problems, so we rebid the second contract, and they got better again. So our ratings kept getting better when nothing was really being done. When AECOM came on a few years back, that was our problem. And then the first round, they asked questions that no one had ever asked before. Really detailed, where does your wheel path start? So we had to do a lot of thinking and research. But then we did the first set came back again better, but not. So we had a recalibration effort, and we sat down with everybody in one room and really sought out what was the right answer. So we're pretty confident now. With what we're getting, we've changed a lot of math on our side, all the calculations, different distresses.
It is a lot of work. Ed?
In Connecticut, we follow a parallel track with Maryland ever since Pete Stefanos and Jonathan Grover came in a single car to visit us to see how we were doing the automated crack detection, and then they did it right after that. But what I'd like to say about this is that the performance measures data is the same data that we use for the pavement management system, is the same data that we use for the HPMS. It's one data set reported out to 3 different entities. And I think that's kind of the key here is that, we're not having a separate effort for the performance measures data. And that's due in part to the fact that whether you contract out or you own the vehicles, you have been using your pavement data collection effort for the HPMS. And the HPMS is feeding the performance measures. So in that sense, it's the same data stream.
Ideally, I think that's true, but I don't know if that's uniformly true for every state. I know there are states that actually maintain HPMS data separate from their pavement management system data.
We have gotten calls from states where the pavement people and the do not get the IRI data submitted for HPMS in the same DOT.
Ideally, what Ed is telling you is absolutely true, but the reality sometimes is quite different from what the ultimate goal is. Okay, and this relates back to that. Are you continuing to collect and calculate your old performance measures as well as the FHWA measures?
As I said, IRI, we've only collected and turned it over to HPMS. We've never used it as part of our calculations. I think we're going to factor it in now, but it's not going to be the only factor. We added with the new thing, the rutting, the faulting, and we'll collect. They'll incorporate that into our stuff, but the federal stuff is still. We're having to do things something different for them.
Okay.
See, we've never trusted our faulting data collected with the IRI sensors, and now we're starting to trust it coming from the 3D imagery. And so we've never used it for our own purposes. We're about 1% concrete, But now that we have to do full extent, that was actually a big change for us. Starting in 2015, we had somebody, one of those 4 people in the office is tagging every concrete slab, intact slab or cracked slab, full extent. That's a lot of time because there's nothing automated that does that well. And so, you know, that's somebody counting slabs for a month. We have now adopted that concrete measure, and then also we're drawing area boxes over the CRCP distresses for the first time. Again, there's nothing automated that we have available that does that with any degree of skill. So concrete measures we're now taking those HPMS measures and integrating them into the state measures. With asphalt cracking, okay, the federal measure says, give me your area wheel path with the presence of any fatigue crack. Could be a hairline longitudinal wheel path crack, or it could be alligator cracked and potholed and terrible. And it would have, as long as the length is the same, it would have the same area cracked for the federal measure. But Maryland's cracking measures, we actually have 2 measures. One is functional cracking, so that's all transverse cracks and any non-wheel path longitudinal cracks. And then we also measure all longitudinal, wheel path cracks, both sealed and unsealed. We pull the unsealed cracks outside the wheel path. So it's tricky for us. It all comes from the same data stream, but the calculations are different. So for the federal measure, we're looking at the extent within the wheel path with longitudinal cracks, and we're taking that area and dividing it, and that's our percent cracking. For the state measures, we are actually tallying the linear footage of every crack detected, and we're dividing the linear footage by the area rated. And it's not a percentage, it's a ratio. Linear feet of cracking divided by the area of pavement rated. And so we call that crack density. And so we have structural density, longitudinal wheel path cracks. And for what it's worth, we think the wheel path should align with the trucks with a 6-foot center wheelbase. And so we go now 1 meter. So we have changed a bit with our wheel path. It used to be 40 inches, now we're, 39 and a half. We report out percent cracking to the feds, and from that same data stream, we're calculating cracking density, which we like better because we also include our transverse cracks and the non-wheel path cracks. It's a more complete picture, and we also include friction. So for ourselves, we have a different system as well for delineating good, fair, and poor. So we have 5 measures: ride rutting, 2 flavors of cracking, and friction. And the worst one, controls. We've normalized them all by functional class. So interstates have a higher standard than locals. And so we get now 14 functional classes if you include urban and rural, but 7 functional systems. And each one has their own set of rating thresholds, serviceability criteria, and that's all normalized on a 0 to 50 scale. So we are really happy with our system of defining good, fair, and poor. Actually, it's 6 grades. It's excellent through poor. So we've got a rainbow-colored map that has a little bit more delineation than 3 colors, and so there is a distinction. We are, for our own purposes, we're using our own condition rating system still, and also in parallel reporting the federal measures.
Okay.
And so.
That's the answer to the question. So don't swallow up all the questions in one answer, please. It will make us back on track for time, but nevertheless, Ed.
So we are continuing to collect for many of the same reasons. So I'll refer to Nate's answer that you collect the data as a single data stream, but you interpret it differently. You need it in a certain way to manage your pavement management system, and the performance for different reasons is classified differently for FHWA. So yes, and then we have a yearly process where we review our performance measures, so our IRI-based ones are likely to change within 1 or 2 years to something that relates back to the state of good repair. And for the answers of 4 and 5, I'm going to switch over to the slides and show you 4 pictures of why we're doing that.
Okay, but let's get to question 4 before you jump up. Question number 4 was, how similar or dissimilar are your results for pavements in good, fair, and poor between your old measures, your state measures, and the new federal measures?
So
So Ed, I'm gonna just let you go ahead.
They're
since you-
very different, and when the projector is back, I'll show you how they look differently. So I'm gonna just show you one investment scenario with the national measures as we computed them last summer. And basically, there's only 3 condition levels at for the federal measures. And for Connecticut, it's very hard to stay in the good range. All 3 indicators have to be good, and IRI is the one that goes first typically, especially non-interstate pavements. And then the fair range is big. So this presents a problem for the preservation community, which is slides 3 and 4. The state of good repair is somewhere in the middle of the fair range. And what you do with preservation is you keep payments from falling into the backlog, which is in the federal measures right in the middle of the fair range. So it doesn't show a change. So you can show, for example, and we simulated this, switching to a mostly preservation program and a worse first, and switching and you cannot see much of a difference. Where you, and when you look at measures that capture state of good repair, you can see the effect of preservation. So that's why we're keeping them around and trying to focus on state of good repair. I think Federal Highway is also thinking of that. They're just not confident that that can work out yet. So that's my answer to number 4. Is they look very different, and when the projector's up, you'll see it. So this is and we have a big kink there, and that's in the measure definition. So falling from good to fair is very easy, and it happens to us. It's the echo or bullwhip effect of a big preservation year or 2 years that we had in 2012 and 13, and all of a sudden we see this jump or a drop in poor that happens all in about 1 year with our projections. But if you do, the graph on the left is a preservation-driven strategy. The one on the right is not. It's more of a worse first, kind of what we have now. For the rest of the network, it's the same thing. So you don't see much of a difference. But here you can see that between the yellow and the green is the line of good repair. It's the best approximation to it. And the preservation one does a lot better job of holding down the backlog. So under the worst first program, you see a lot more yellow towards the end, and that's even in 10 years. So that impact, which is all driven by doing things better, doesn't show up in the measures. So we need to keep our own measures to manage our program properly. And this is a slide to make the same point out of TRB presentation that James Bryce gave at our committee meeting, where they're looking at the next generation measures, remaining service interval, and their simulation was, you take the current definition of fair, and then you look at what needs to be done to the section, and you split it in 2. Half of it is green, half is yellow. And that's kind of what we were observing with the data. So that's why it's imperative for us to keep the things that really matter to our payment management system, communicate them, because the national measures don't do it. So that's what I wanted to show you most.
So we're 10% poor in our own metrics. We're on the interstates. 1%, less than 1% poor in federal metrics. So that's a very different story. And when we looked at money, it gets interesting. Because when you try to put a dollar value on the infrastructure, which you have to do now with the TAM, and it's just good practice anyway. If you got 3 categories of performance with federal measures, right? So we assign 100% value when we're good, 0% value when we're poor, and 50% value when we're fair. Kind of arbitrary, but we got 3 categories. Bridge folks have 10, so they can, so they get a little more granularity. So if I do that on my system, I have 69% value. Okay. So, or you remain service life, I don't know, but 69%, are, that would be our depreciated, replacement value. So the state measure would be like 47%. There's 2 different stories. That would be if we take our 6 categories and assign 100%, 0%, maximum 4, and then 20% gradients between. So I guess that's our, unfortunately, we're left with a bit of confusion. You know, on a federal level, we have a more comparable story with other DOTs, but locally, it gets interesting because I have different standards for different functional classes. I'm actually 10% poor on my locals as well. But my thresholds are different, right? So I don't have poor IRI, it's only 325 on the locals. I have poor IRI when I'm at 170 on the interstates with the state measures. With the federal measures, there's one threshold 170 across all roads. So it gets difficult actually because we need to understand who our audience is when we're telling our story.
Yes, our numbers are different also. Federal-wise, non-interstate, we're 60, 39, and 1 good, fair, poor, and then interstate is 55, 45, and 1% poor. But in our world, we're 84% good, which is much better than 95% good. It doesn't sound like it, but it is. 9% fair and 7% poor. But the same thing, we've got it depends who you talk to, and we're a very small state, very political, very legislative based. So, and everything, you know, is on the dashboard, and there's been concern with these new measures and someone's going to report it, and suddenly, you know, but we have some, David Nicole, who's our asset manager, something, and he's not worried about it. He said just we can, you know, keep doing our numbers and report them. We'll explain the other when it happens.
I just want to say it is a real shame that Thomas Van is not here to hear this discussion, because I think this is a really important discussion for the Federal Highway to hear.
I think it highlights that you have to tell your own story before it gets reported by a newspaper. You have to figure out how to proactively get your message and your story out so that people know what they're looking at before they get it on a I'm not going to knock journalists too much, but a cheap headline.
What issues have you encountered in trying to implement the new performance measures? Any issues?
So measuring cracking in concrete for us, but that, we're sort of muscled through that. We're just going to keep going there. And so that's been an issue. And then figuring out this whole extent of cracking thing. And now just thinking conversations with our secretary's office and what do we communicate. If we have a public dashboard, we're going to need 2 dashboards now.
Yep.
Right? So we're going to have an asset management dashboard that tells our own story, perhaps. Or maybe not. Maybe we're only going to show a MAP 21, federal measure dashboard. That all the people who really do the asset management are going to say that's not really our story. So it gets difficult. That's an issue.
I don't think we'll have a MAP 21 dashboard. I'm pretty sure we're just going to keep our own. But it's been, it's been money, of course. A lot of the distresses we had already were collecting, but we have to, some of the new ones. Therefore, we have to have performance measures behind it or models to fit in our pavement management system to do the calculations and all that. And there's also guidelines about when it's collected. So now, we have to send a vehicle out just to collect interstate, every year, to collect every other year. So, we have definitely some more money we're spending on that kind of thing.
Yeah, we had to formalize our quality management plan, and that was an issue, but it's actually a great opportunity to make the data better. Another one has been trying to get this story correct. Even internally, there was an expectation that analyzing things in terms of the national measures would make the case that pavement management data typically does, and it didn't. So we had to do 2 rounds of it over the summer. That's how I spent my summer, was doing calculations and scenario analysis. Another one was getting our pavement management systems to report the data out in terms of the measures so we could run more scenarios as we had it. And we had to forecast performance in terms of the national measures, not in terms of how we collected. So we had to do significant work on the PMS over the summer. And we're still engaging our software provider to give us more functionality so that the PMS is more responsive to providing the output in the performance measures. Another one is that the time horizon, the 4-year time horizon, is, half of the projects that are going to impact our performance are already obligated and planned. There's not much you can do, for rehab projects. That's the engineering time. So if it isn't already programmed in, it's not going to figure in the 4-year performance. And that's really very short for pavements. The asset management plan that's driving the program is 10 years, and that's even too short for pavement analysis, I think. So we run longer analysis to see the impact of how we're supposed to manage our pavement. So that's another issue that we encountered. And that's basically it.
One of the questions that I had written is, what benefit do you see for your agency in using the new performance measures? Anybody have any benefits? We've heard a lot about what the downside is, so let's see, are there benefits now?
I want to be able to compare notes with everybody, with the other agencies in the room. So I hope that we can start telling real stories of real treatments using measures that we all share in common. And I know it's not going to be exactly common, but I don't know of any other state that's doing a functional crack density, with the same wheel paths that I have. So I can't compare the improvement from crack sealing like that, with any other states. But can we compare the federal measure? That's actually going to be a tricky one, because the federal measure is just the wheel paths, and the federal measurement includes sealed cracks. So you seal it, it's still a crack, it's still no change, right, with the federal measure. But with other treatments, there could be some real change. So what's the benefit of, say, ultra model rainforest? And we could talk in the same general set of protocols, at least with ride faulting and percent cracking. So I'm hoping that's a benefit to the industry generally, and that we're able to at least compare notes, with a similar context.
I can see that too, but for us, the NHS is such a small portion. We have 4,500 centerline miles that we maintain. And I think there's like 400 NHS. So that's just such a little bit. So we're more worried about the whole system. So, for us, I don't really see much of a benefit.
Ed?
Yeah, the biggest benefit we had was everybody from the executive team down to the entire link organizational to the pavement management unit has become conversant in pavements, which typically that's too weedy for them. So you're in the weeds if you talk about anything in particular. So except money. And over the development of the asset management plan, they've had to learn pavement and care about it, and then consequently support things like the data collection effort. There's no question now when a purchase order comes in for the maintenance contract for the data collection vehicle, it flies through, where we had like 2 years without a maintenance contract. And the only reason we could collect data was because we had 2 of the hires, photolog drivers, were actually electronic technicians that worked in the radio lab before. So they knew their way around hardware, and they could keep all plugged in. Now that's not a question. And so that's great. And having, for my new role and looking at all these performance measures, it does this for every program. Even the CMAC program, the measure is like measuring acceleration and, 0 to 60, but you don't report the speed curve, you report the acceleration curve. So it forces people to go back and say, how are we managing this program? And that's a big, huge benefit for the agencies. So, I don't want to say it's all, I've had great pavement conversations with people that wouldn't have paid that much of attention. They were too busy before, but because this has to happen, they've done it. So that's been great.
That's good. That turned out much more positive than I was afraid that question was going to end up. And I appreciate that. This is the last question. And this is a question that really a lot of pavement management people really deal with every time we change a system, every time you change a methodology. How do you bridge your old data with your new data? It sounds like, Rhonda, you're maintaining 2 sets of books and you're not bridging.
Yes.
Okay.
it's all going through the one system, but we do have a separate master file for the HPMS stuff, the MAP 21. But those, we're still collecting and rating them for us also, so yeah, we've had to just do a
Right.
thing.
Nate, what about you?
There is just no way to translate these very different protocols using different data, different metrics. There is no conversion from the state good, fair, poor to the federal good, fair, poor. They're just fundamentally different, and we like the state stuff so much that we just want to keep it, and we wish the federal measures would evolve to match ours, of course. I will say, let me just have a kind of a comment. ASCE and Reason and TRIP, they're giving our roads a D, and the sky is falling, and tragedy all around us. We need to fund roads really heavily, and so there's this "the sky is falling" cry from those industry groups, and then now the federal measures are like, well, we're actually less than 1% poor, so it's like, who cares, right? No big deal, 1%. What's the problem here? And so I'm concerned that the federal measures don't really tell the real story, and there's this strange contrast from the sky is falling, everything is falling apart, to what's the problem? What do you need money for? Because you're only 1% poor. And I think that the real story is in between. And it's just, I wish that there was a better opportunity to have more robust measures that were clearer on telling that story. So I think that when we have to have two measures poor, in order to be poor, that you might have bad cracking and that's it, and you got to deal with that, but it doesn't show up with the federal measures, right? If you're still riding smooth enough. So it's not really an asset management system, from my perspective, with the federal measures like I wish it was.
It's going to be tough to bridge things, and the reason is that data is the same in terms of just the actual measurement of a physical feature. That's where things match. When you talk about good, fair, poor in terms of how the feds need it, it's very at the top of Maslow's pyramid. And so it's very tough to match two things when you're looking and processing data and then interpreting it and then making an assessment for your purposes. But a crack is a crack. It's like Godwin's law of online forum. You can look it up, Godwin's law. In Pavement, it's always, what is a crack? You end up at that, after 2 drinks or 10, you say, what is a crack? And every conversation goes to that. And we haven't solved that yet. And that's where the data is going to bridge. A crack is going to be a crack as long as we have a physical definition for it. So there's, I'm not that concerned about bridging good, fair, poor, because it's not going to happen. I mean, we've already seen over state by state by state by state. Kentucky made this a point at the national conference in October of 2016 that they're reporting 25% poor on their interstates, and the Fed measures have 2%. That was back 2 years ago. So we could see this coming. Now there's an issue with conveying preservation benefits with the national performance, but they don't. But the data is the data, and if you, at the physical level, eventually it's going to happen, and then we can take it in any analysis direction that we want. There's another, to Nate's point of why there's 2 stories that are contrasting. One, the sky is falling, the ASCE D+ infrastructure card, and why things don't look that bad, is that I've thought about this a lot, and it looks like, to me, that the infrastructure looks bad when you have no slack anymore. So no bridges fall. Like when bridge fall makes news, we don't let our bridges fall. What we lose when we're falling behind is the slack. We have no more slack. At some point, you have to execute perfectly in order to maintain those conditions. You have no more slack. And that's how the infrastructure is deteriorating. It's not that the bridges are falling, but now, if you look forward, I have no room for error anymore. 10 years ago, I could, yeah.
Can you expand on that? You say there's no benefit according to the federal system for preservation.
Yeah, the fair range is very broad, and the state of good repair is buried inside of it. And The states are observing that. I talked a lot with the California Caltrans, and they've made a comment. AASHTO's putting together comments to the FHWA in terms of that. South Carolina is seeing the same thing. Kentucky pointed that out in October. We're seeing it. I just showed you. They look different. And for preservation, the additional implication is that you're playing with good and fair pavements. You're not moving the poor range at all. That's what people focus on right away. And now you're changing things within a range. So in the federal measure, it looks like the same thing. And you're increasing the backlog if you cut back on your preservation funding or if you get away from preservation. And that's where you see the benefit. That was the, I'll show you this. You know, this, which doesn't look that impressive, but in my mind it is. The left side, which is more reactive, if you look at that yellow to green, like green and blue on one side, that line goes up, meaning you have less in good or better when you don't do preservation. And you do much better, even though this is insufficient funding. You do much better in the backlog at the state of good repair with preservation. Now, the flip side, of course, is that your percent poor goes up. But that is where you put your worst first money. That's what you should be doing with that money. I mean, the public of your state, through phone calls, have a second condition measure for whatever you think you have, which is like pave my road, and then the legislature gets on the board. That's a de facto minimum condition level that you have to maintain. So part of your program should be going to addressing that, because you're gonna have to deal with it whether you like it or not. It's just minimizing that pot of money to maximize keeping that line of good repair as much pavement in good repair as you can.
We're going to close by, I'm going to just let each of the presenters make a parting comment if you have one.
I don't think I have one. I think I kind of made it already. We have two stories and we're just struggling with sharing which one, decide which one to share or how to share them.
Rhonda, any parting words?
I don't think so either. As I said, we've been doing a lot of work in our system the past number of years, and we're really happy where we're almost at. So
Okay.
this is just going to be a little bit of extra work for us, but we're concentrating what we do.
My parting comment is that I'm appreciative of the fact that there are performance measures that we have to measure. I don't think our problems are going to be with Federal Highway. They understand what their measures are trying to measure. It's going to be communicating to stakeholders. That's what we have to gear up, and that's in Connecticut. That's our focus between now and October, when they will be posted somewhere on the Federal Highway, and they're going to put them out. And then that's when the newspaper headline is going to hit. Connecticut has the worst whatever in the nation, And so that is something that we need to do between now that we're setting targets a couple of weeks from now, and October 1st when we report them and it will become public. Got to get a story ahead of the headline. And that's going to be true for every measure, not just pavement.
Right.
Connecticut has the worst congestion in the nation, according to the NPMRDS.
Would you join me in thanking the presenters? Thank you.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.